Welcome. My name is Simone Chandel, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our second event of 2022, kindly supported by Buchanan, The Good Pitch, the Do's and Don'ts with Mining Media. Before we officially start, I would like to run through the usual housekeeping points. Please note, we are recording today's event, which will be available for playback on our WIM YouTube channel. So please do look out for it. We're not following Chatham House rule. If you could be so kind to keep your mics on mute, that would be greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to ask any questions, please feel free to ask them via the chat function. Time permitting, we will get to them. I must give my thanks to Ariadna Peretz, Head of Communications at Women in Mining UK and Director at Buchanan for today's event. Ariadna, as always, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to support us. Ariadna will also be kindly moderating today's panel, and it gives me great pleasure now to hand over to her to kick off today's event.
Thanks, Iman. Hi and good afternoon. As Iman said, my name is Ariadna. I'm Head of Communications at Women in Mining UK. My day job is a director at Buchanan. We're a financial PR agency here in London. We've got a very strong mining team, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things that I do at work, which is media relations. It's also something that's very delicate. It's a fine balance between getting that story out and making sure that it's dealt with in a balanced manner. First things first, let's introduce our panel. So Carly, if you don't mind introducing yourself first.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Carly Leonida. I'm a freelance technical writer and editor. I've been working in mining journalism for about 15 years on various trade publications, mainly B2B ones, including Mining Magazine. And at the moment, I'm the current European editor at Mining Media International. I also run a publication called The Intelligent Miner, which is online only.
Kirsty?
Hello, hi, I'm Kirsty Hickey. I'm a business producer at Sky News. I work on the Ian King live show, as well as working with our business correspondents, Ed Conway, Helen Ann-Smith, and Paul Kelso. I've worked in the business sort of news desk for about just over a year now. Previous to that, I've been at Sky just under 7 years, working across politics and general news.
And Neil?
Yeah, hi. I'm Neil Hume, the Natural Resources Editor at the FT, and I'm basically in charge of all of the FT's coverage of natural resources. So that goes from anything from oil and gas through to metals, mining, agriculture, and increasingly we're sort of dabbling in things like clean tech, so sort of green hydrogen, things like that. I think I've been at the FT 15 or 16 years now, I've kind of lost count, and I was at The Guardian before that.
Great, thanks everyone. And you know, today is a big day in the natural resources and geopolitical news. Ukraine is being invaded by Russia, so big news day. Thank you for everyone for making the time. Ukraine is a very rich country in natural resources, so yeah, thanks for making the time. So my first question is, and let's start with Carly. What's the best way to pitch a story to you? And is there something that people regularly do wrong when they pitch to you?
So I think, before you even pitch a story, it's really important to think about the type of news that you have and which publications it's going to be most suitable for, or which ones are the most likely to pick it up. So I've worked on quite a few B2B publications in the mining space that specifically cover mining equipment and technologies, but quite often we get people calling to pitch stories about commodity pricing or mergers and acquisitions, something that just was totally irrelevant. Likewise, on the Intelligent Miner, what we do is specialize in really in-depth feature-length pieces around the process and the business of mining. So we don't really run straight-up news stories. But again, I often receive calls or emails about quarterly drilling results or different campaigns. So I would say choose your publications really carefully. Do your research to give your pitches the greatest success of being picked up. And if the story doesn't appear directly relevant to the title's agenda or the readership, then take the time to explain to the editor why it's relevant and worth the space. And I would say also, when you're pitching a story, regardless of whether it's by email or telephone, address the editor by their name, make sure that you know how to pronounce it, and which pronouns they like to use. If you're not sure, either Google it or perhaps go on LinkedIn. There's a little function now next to people's names where you can click it and it will tell you how to pronounce it. Stuff like that. It's quite basic, but I mean, if I literally receive hundreds of emails a day when working on trade publications. So if an email doesn't have my name on it, I will tend to assume that it's just a blanket one to multiple publications. And unless it's really big news, I probably won't give it too much time. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the main ones.
Thanks for that, Carly. Let's go with Kirsty first and then Neil. Same question.
Yes, so on my side, it's a bit different for TV. So because Ian King Live is a show 5 days a week, we run quite fast paced in that by the time 24 hours lapses, usually a story that's embargoed for that day is out of date for us. In terms of what we can offer, so usually for a press release, for me, the best thing is the top line and what you're offering at the top. There's so many times where I'll read emails and it won't tell you the crux of the story until about halfway through in paragraphs, the second and third paragraph. So totally great to have what you're pitching at the top. The guest you can offer for us higher up the business chain is better. In terms of offering a CFO, a CEO will always, be, gold standard for us. And knowing the difference between a chief executive and a chief economist, and knowing that they're not totally different roles. And whereas a chief executive can talk about the business, chief economist can only give their insight into a report or, whatever they're offering. And a bit like what Carly mentioned, for us by email is always best. Having telephone calls are great. But in terms of the whole rigmarole of day-to-day news, having a telephone call for 10-15 minutes is great for sort of chatting over the phone. But when we're kind of booking stories for every day, like 10 guests a day, 5 days a week, email is always best. And it's also useful because if the next day, i.e. this morning, Ian King Live was cancelled, those guests obviously won't be used, but it's amazing how much we return to those guests further down the line. So an example I can give today is a fertilizer company who pitched their story last year. We didn't, well, I can't remember if we used them. I've gone back to them again today and said, look, what are your problems now, especially with Ukraine? And yeah, we've kind of used them because they're in my email history to speak to them further down the line. And the final thing is, if you're pitching a guest, do make sure that they're actually available. There are so many times when a guest is pitched and then we get, oh, I'm really sorry, we're not able to offer them, but we can offer this completely different story, which when 5 days a week news is rolling, it might not necessarily be related and also not as sort of high bar as it was offered. So yeah, they're my top tips.
And Neil, what's the best way to pitch a story to you, and what do people usually get wrong?
I know that the best way. The worst way is just to send an unsolicited email through. I'll either won't read it or it'll get buried with all the other stuff. So that kind of doesn't really work for me. Being on the FT, I mean, the best way to get through and pitch a story to me is actually to have some sort of relationship with me, and actually having met me and know me and being able to call up or send me sort of a WhatsApp message and go from there. So, if you've established that relationship in the first place, I think it's going to be a lot easier to get the story through. And then one of the things people don't do a lot of is actually kind of craft a narrative around what they're trying to tell with a piece of company news. I mean, what is the broader picture here? Why are my readers going to be interested in it? Because I'm going to have a paragraph around 3 or 4 in my story telling my readers, this is why you should be interested in, X company doing this or its chief executive. I do think quite, hard about whether, I don't know, this is a green sort of transition sort of narrative or an emission narrative, but do, think about having that sort of, think about that paragraph, that explainer about why, my readership's going to want to know about it, because, just sending through an email about a trading update or something like that probably is going to be futile, I would say. Yeah,
context is super important. Like why, you've got the what, but what's the so what? Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I've had it in the past week, people just emailing me about, do I want to talk to a recycling company? Because I wrote a recycling story on Glencore. No, it's not going to work.
Gotcha. Okay, so my next question is for both Neil and Kirsty, and let's start with Neil. Is there any certain type of criteria that a company needs to satisfy before you say yes to them? Like, do they have to be listed? Do they have to be in the UK? Is there a minimum market cap? Let's start with Neil.
No, there's no hard and fast rules. I mean, look, the news desk prefer bigger companies. So if you have got a smaller company that you want to pitch, I mean, it would be useful to try and, again, have a bit of a narrative around one of the founders and, you know, have they got an interesting backstory? Why should we be writing about, I don't know, a $50, $60 million company? You know, there needs to be a real reason for doing that. So we wouldn't necessarily just rule out a small company, but, you know, it would need to have some sort of interesting founder, interesting backer, interesting sort of CEO. Public, private, no, we wouldn't really discriminate on that front. And just because something's listed in the UK doesn't necessarily mean for us that it would get in before a European or a US or an Asian company now. I mean, we're quite global, but it is, yeah, big companies are sort of easier. Smaller ones do need, I mean, we wrote about a really small company recently in America that's looking for like old zinc mines. I mean, it's got a tiny market cap, but the guy who runs it used to be at Barrack. He was very senior there. He ran one of the, you know, leading regiments in the SAS. So it was kind of an interesting story that, you know, somebody who was in Afghanistan all those years ago was now turning his sort of skills to trying to revive zinc mines that were founded, you know, 150 years ago. So that's kind of a nice, interesting story with a bit of color around it.
Kirsty?
Yeah, so everything Neil mentioned, there's no hard and fast rule. We're really keen to hear from big companies, obviously, but also small ones too. We tend to have a slot at 10:50, which is focused on smaller businesses, startups, anyone really. We kind of get, you know, during the pandemic, we received an email from, I think he was 21, 22. He was starting his own donut business. And that was brilliant. That was, you know, small business at the very heart of, you know, startups and wanting to, you know, get his name out. His I think the perseverance and the sort of angle he was going for really appealed to us. And yeah, there is, you know, big companies will always want, you know, company results and hearing, you know, new things they're doing, but yeah, we don't rule out small ones either.
How can you say no to donuts? Cool, so thanks for that. So the next question is for Neil and for Carly. It's about op-eds because you both deal with them. At the FT, we've got the commodities note, and Carly also, I believe, at your two publications. So, I mean, everyone thinks that they can write, but that's not really the case. So what should people have in mind when they're putting together a op-ed? And I'm talking like the topic, the word count, the voice. Yeah, can you help our viewers understand that? Let's start with Carly.
Sure. So I'd say for op-eds, I need to know who you are, basically. I need to know your background, your experience, why you're qualified to speak on a subject. That counts for a lot. If you've got examples of other articles that you've written for other publications, link them within the body of your email. Don't attach them because then the email could end up going to junk. I would say, I mean, if your spelling and grammar are terrible, or if the story is poorly structured and it's going to take me a long time to edit, then the answer will probably be no. And I'm sure Neil will say the same thing. But yeah. Conversely, if you write really well and you can prove that and you're going to make my life easier, then we're more likely to accept the pitch. I would say if you wanted to sort of brush up on word count and things like that, just go onto, you know, the publication's website, or perhaps have a look through their back issues, see how long their stories tend to be in terms of pages. You can check their house style as well, so you can tailor your piece a little bit to them that way. Yeah, I would say that's probably the main thing. I mean, if you're looking for technical features as well, if you wanted to contribute to those, it's always worth going on the publication's website and seeing if they've got an editorial calendar, because obviously lots of, particularly the monthly trade publications, do time their content around those, in which case reach out to the editor, speak to the advertising person, see if you can get hold of a copy, because they're not always on the website. And if you can plan your pitches around those, then you're much more likely to get accepted.
Neil, anything to add?
Well, I mean, we're pretty clear. I mean, for a commodities note, we only want about 750 words. The reader's attention sort of wanders after 750, so there's no point writing any more. And yeah, so please don't do that. As Carly said, if I've got to spend an hour and a half editing and rewriting your piece, I'm not going to bother. So it needs to arrive in sort of, you know, pretty good form. I mean, we do have a guide that we'll send out to people. It's got sort of 6 points on it of stuff that we think they should take into consideration when they are writing a note. And sort of one of the things is to have your own voice in a really strongly argued piece. If that's contrarian and it goes against the sort of the received wisdom out there, we kind of like those stories, and that is, or those opinion pieces, that's likely to get in. But if you're coming there just to do a self-promotional sort of marketing piece, then it will get spiked immediately. And yeah, you wouldn't believe how many of those pieces come through. And the other thing is jargon. I mean, we don't need or want industry jargon. It needs to be explained simply. We can't just have loads of acronyms in there, because you can't assume that it's going to a specialist audience. I mean, our newsletter will go out to, you know, pretty much all of our sort of, you know, registered subscribed readers. So there will be lay readers out there that have an interest in commodity markets, but they're not necessarily going to know in the oil market what, you know, a backwardation is, or, you know, the difference between Urals and Brent and dated Brent and things like that. So it needs to be explained, you know, in lay terms. But yeah, as I say, we're always happy to send out this this sort of checklist that we've got. But strongly argue pieces that go against the conventional wisdom stand a good chance of getting in for a commodities note.
And are you looking for something that is relevant to the news of today, or can it just be, you know, we've done a report and we've come up with these type of observations and we want to share them in an op-ed? Or yeah.
No, it can be both. I mean, like a news hook is good. I mean, there would be plenty of stuff at the moment to look at. Yeah, but alternatively, I mean, we've had some reports come through before, you know, about diversity in mining that a big headhunter did, and that had some really good, interesting lines, and it wasn't particularly topical then, but it was able to form, you know, the basis of a good sort of opinion piece. But
cool.
Altogether, lots of strands. So no, it doesn't have to be current.
Okay, and then back to you, Carly. Something that you work with a lot are editorial calendars. I personally find that editorial calendars are hidden in the back, in like a page within a page within a PDF, very difficult to find. And sometimes I wonder, like, do they stick to it? Can I still pitch them a story that's not in sync with the editorial calendar? So can you walk our viewers through the necessity of an editorial calendar and how much you stick to it?
Sure. I would say, yeah, they can be difficult to get hold of. But if in doubt, reach out to the editor, reach out to the advertising person, they'll be able to send a copy through. Most B2B publications do tend to stick to them quite rigidly, simply because they don't just use them to solicit editorial, they use them to sell advertising against as well. So if it's in the calendar, it's most likely going to be run. And normally as well, they'll include not just sort of an overall theme or a topic for the month, but there'll probably be a few lines sort of saying we're going to cover X, Y, Z, or this might be included. So it's always worth a little look. I would say for both the Intelligent Miner and Engineering and Mining Journal, I tend to start work on features about 4 to 6 weeks out, researching, reaching out to people, arranging interviews, just seeing what they've got going on, really. So yeah, if you come to me within that time frame with a story, I'm probably more likely to say yes. And something I think you touched upon earlier, it might have been Kirsty, sort of building relationships with journalists and things. I would say if you're a comms person or work at a PR firm, it's really worth getting to know the editors at 2 or 3 key publications, go to trade shows, meet them for a coffee, build a bit of a relationship so that you're the first person they call when they need a company or a spokesperson for a subject. Now, again, most of the editors in the mining space, we all know each other. Once people are in the industry, they tend not to leave. We all move around the same sort of 10 publications or so. And yeah, so in that sense, it's time well spent. Even if somebody moves to another publication, they might, you know, reach out to you and you might get an opportunity there that you hadn't yet considered. So it's definitely time well spent in my eyes.
Thanks for that. Okay, so we've covered the good stuff, like the happy stuff, when you've got, when a company has a story that they want to get out into the public domain, either through an op-ed, a segment, an article. But now let's talk about when there are some negative or not so good developments, and how companies should treat it and work with newspapers or magazines and shows. So can I ask you three to walk us through how you deal with bad news that you want to cover? Bad news, you know, just like negative news stories, like what you do is tips, do you check with lawyers, things like that. So why don't we start with Kirsty first?
Yes. So how do we deal with bad news? We will always reach out to the business for a statement. We will ask them for Ian King Live to come on the show. Usually it's a no. The best way though is I find, to receive a statement, get the other side and want to hear from what they're doing. I think that's the best way that I can explain it. I know Neil and Carly will probably go more into detail. For us though, it's kind of always hearing from the business, because you'll always hear the other side, and in our case the sort of consumers or workers. Yeah.
Neil, how about you? What does the Financial Times do when there's something that they'd like to cover that's negative-ish?
Well, I mean, we've got pretty strict rules on sourcing. So, I mean, we won't run anything unless we can have it at least double sourced, ideally triple sourced, and from different sites. So that kind of is the first thing that you know, we'll look for. All of our stories also have to go through a lawyer as well, and he will insist that we give the company in question, you know, plenty of time to respond and comment to anything that is negative. So that's kind of the way we would do it. And then, you know, it would be good to talk to, you know, the CEO, to put somebody up to explain exactly what's gone on. I just find sometimes companies don't put people up, or they don't sort of, you know, put everything on the line when there is bad news. And that's just a sort of a surefire way of making sure the story runs and runs and runs. But that's how we would cover it. But we would, you know, we do want to try and be objective and give, as I say, companies as much chance as possible to respond. So we're not going to rush through and just say, you know, you've got 10 minutes to respond to this story, because that's, you know, patently unfair. So we will give you sort of ample time to come through, and then, yeah, you could comment publicly. But yeah, background briefings when there's bad news. I mean, I'm sort of reluctant to do it actually a lot of the time. I think you should.
That means when you're not doing it on record.
Yeah, on the record. Yeah. I mean, I don't see why we should be giving someone the benefit of the doubt on background, trying to incorporate it into our story. If they've got bad news, they should sort of front up and say it, you know, on the record to us.
And Carly?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, the publications that I work on tend to be more in the way of technical stories, but obviously we do cover news from time to time. And yeah, I would say if we've got a sensitive story, as Neil and Kirsty said, always careful to double or triple source with publicly available information, legit sources, things like press releases, market announcements, whatever we can get our hands on. And I would say that's just good practice, regardless of whether it's good or bad news. And personally, I would certainly run it past a senior editor or publisher, the story that is, or someone in legal before making it live.
Thanks, Carly. Yeah, you know, one of the pieces of advice that we give our clients is that when there is some negative news or not so positive news that they have to share with in the public domain, is to own it, make sure that they're able to give context, because otherwise it's other people that will be talking on their behalf, and that's the last thing you want, because you're not going to get your key messages through to your stakeholders. So my next question was, do you have examples of when companies have dealt with bad news well? Let's start with Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple from the mining industry. I mean, I thought, one was the Samarco tailings disaster back in 2015, I think it was. I thought the way BHP dealt with that was very good. You know, the CEO got on a plane from Melbourne, got to Brazil, got in front of the TV cameras and was talking, was prepared to talk to anyone, to explain what had gone on, what they were going to do about it. He was very, 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 very open, and I thought that was well handled. He didn't hide away. If you contrast that to the way Rio Tinto handled the destruction of UCAN Gorge, where their chief executive didn't say anything for over 2 weeks, not so good. And that was, there were two sort of different ways to handle a crisis. And the second way ultimately cost a lot of people at Rio their jobs, and ensured that that news story was making headlines for 3-4 months, and spread way beyond Australia to the City of London, to big institutions and beyond. And that was, a consequence of not owning the story and actually, getting out there as the leader, sort of putting I don't know, less senior executives out there. Look, and that may be a case that the lawyers are telling people you can't go out and say anything because you're going to get sued. But I don't know, I think in these situations, sometimes, leaders need to step up and sort of disregard that advice and do what's best for like the wider sort of stakeholders. They're kind of a couple of examples that spring to mind.
How about Carly next?
Tailings were actually the first thing that sprang to my mind as well. I didn't have any specific examples, but I think in the wake of Brumadinho in 2019, there were some companies that handled themselves and their coverage pretty well. I mean, those that did speak openly about their stance when it comes to tailings management, even those that might have found themselves in a bit of hot water because maybe they weren't doing the appropriate monitoring that they should have done, or they didn't have the right governance in place. But the fact that they did lay out the facts and explain what they were doing, going forwards to improve things, I think that's really powerful. And as you said, being transparent, owning your story, regardless of whether the news is good or bad, it sends the right message to people, to stakeholders, investors, communities, even to the media, that you're basically a progressive, responsible company and you're trying to do the right thing. And I think that in instances like that, where there is, pretty bad news, sometimes staying silent actually speaks volumes about company values. And in my opinion, that can be a lot more damaging.
When the tragedy at Brumadinho happened, I recall one client, it didn't affect them, but it's great when, if the issue is with you, it's good to tell people we've learned from this, we're making these changes, and then give people an update 3, 6, 12 months down the line to show how these weren't just empty words, they're actions. But I did have a client around Brumadinho, and they said, well, we don't have those types of tailings. They're not that big, they're dry, but we would be remiss if we didn't actually take what happened to heart and look into it, just to make sure that we're covering all our bases and all our people are safe. Speaking, even if it's not your problem, your issue, it's good to show that you recognize it. And the mining industry, since it is it has a reputation, and safety is so important, we have to make sure that that we're communicating that clearly. I feel like we've lost Kirsty. She may have had to go offline to do work. Oh no, she's back.
No, she's back.
No, sorry, I'm still here. I'm just moving rooms just because the signal's not very good. Give me a second.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question then. So my next question was for Kirsty and Neil. It was, do you always give company the chance to comment? I guess, Neil, you've already shared this with us, that you don't like it when companies comment off the record or give it to you on background. You feel like they need to say it like full on, that you can record it and you can state their name and what they're planning on doing. What happens if they don't want to, though? Like, do you just tell them that it's not possible?
No, I would still listen to it, but I don't think you can necessarily expect that to be reflected in your article by sourcing it to people, familiar with, or, so things like that. So yeah, if you want to do it on background, fine, but I don't think necessarily that's going to be reflected in the piece as such. You know, we'd contextualize things anyway, so we would have that in there. But yeah, if you want that viewpoint to come across, then I think you need to sort of, you know, get out and put it across, really, not just yeah, brief on background. But you know, that, I mean, that's for a particular, that's for a news story, a crisis sort of thing. You know, of course, we'll talk to people, you know, on background generally about their business and how they see the industry and things. But you know, it's for a specific story. Yeah, I think that's the issue with background stuff, I find.
And Kirsty, you work at a TV station, so I guess you wouldn't be able to have anyone do anything on background. It has to be in person, live, or nothing.
Yeah, no, that's right. For us, it's very different. I think in a lot of circumstances, it will be company results for the program, anything new that's being launched. We always have, well, quite recently, electric vehicles, new announcements from those. And again, kind of smaller businesses in the back half, or discussions on debate around the markets, or future business stories. So for us, background is great for the day before, and also setting things up. So we can always do pre-record. So if there is something big that, you know, say the embargo is at 12, we're happy to do something kind of in the afternoon to then make for tomorrow's program, and kind of carry the story that way. Otherwise, on background is good when I'm producing for our correspondents, especially kind of stories moving throughout the day, but it's more tricky for Ian King Live.
Gotcha. So we've got 2 more questions before we open it up to the Q&A. So if you'd like to start asking your questions, please put them in the chat so I can have a read through. So the next question is, you might not know this, or you might, or maybe you do. Which articles or which topics are most widely read? Like, is there anything specific that people like or find interesting? So let's start with Carly.
I would say we have quite a lot at the moment around battery metals. That is always popular. It's a hot topic. It's in the news a lot. People want to know a lot around that. Also, just trying to think off the top of my head. Yeah, anything to do with the green energy transition at the moment. It's very topical. Anything surrounding mining technologies and equipment that can help with that. Responsible sourcing is always responsible mineral sourcing. People really like techie stories as well. Any cool stuff around like blockchain, things like that always go down well.
Okay, I have a question that I didn't ask you before, so I'm just going to throw it out there. When something's really popular, like the Green Revolution, does that mean that the level, like you have got a higher, you demand a higher level of interesting stories, or does it mean that you're accepting more of just random stories because it's a topic that's so interesting? It'd be great to know, like, if it means that you're more specific and discerning, or more open to anything.
I mean, I would say from the editor's perspective, if it's a topic like that, you're going to get more pitches, and therefore you can be a little bit more choosy, which is a nice position to be in. Yeah, so yeah, the quality of pitches would tend to be higher maybe, and therefore you can be a bit more choosy, and that's always nice.
Cool. And Neil, do you know which of your stories or topics are most widely read?
Oh yeah, it kind of varies. I mean, so things like, as Carly was saying, battery materials are very popular at the moment. Anything around gigafactories, readers seem to like. Anything around lithium at the moment as well seems to be very, very hot. Perhaps, I think at the moment, our most widely read stories are actually the more market-facing ones rather than the company ones at the moment. The company ones seem to get well less read. I think the best read story we've had in the past couple of months was something we wrote about the world running short of raw materials and there being no stockpiles of copper, coffee, grain, etc. kind of in the world. So that was very popular, but that did get a good slot on our homepage, and that kind of determines really how many readers you get. If you get it on the homepage, you are going to get a lot of readers, and there's a lot of competition to get it on there. So yeah, those stories are doing well. As I say, sort of company results ones struggle a bit unless there's a really interesting line coming through beyond the results. I mean, I haven't looked at all the ones we've done on the mining companies this week around the sort of dividends, but yeah, I suspect that some of the stuff we've done on the gas market staying like Ukraine would be better. Better read. And the other thing I'd say on just on the climate stuff, I mean, there's a really high bar now for us for climate sort of net zero commitments or policies. Everyone's got one, everyone's trying to push one. There's a lot of greenwashing. So there is an incredibly high bar really to get those stories in the paper. But more widely, I mean, what I'd say is that if you look at our homepage, I don't know how many slots we've got in there for stories, I don't know, 12 or something like that. And we're told now we should only be writing stuff that really stands a realistic chance of getting on there. So that gives you an idea of, you know, how interesting it sort of seems to be. We do want to just sort of cut the long tail of stories that are just, you know, just picking up on press releases or RNS statements and that, because they don't add much value to our readers, because, you know, anyone can pick these up just going online. We need to kind of add a bit more. So, and that means, you know, typically, and our sort of a longer form analytical pieces get better read, and we're putting more resource into having more of those sort of stories going forward. So yeah, we'll write less 500-word news stories in the future, I imagine, and more sort of 1,200-word features would be the way sort of trending, I would imagine.
That's really interesting and very good to know. And I guess that people like me who work in financial PR, if you're a comms person at a company, it's up to us to turn a boring RNS into a story. So giving context, having an interesting quote, some statistics that aren't just about the company, but also about like the world that we live in, to make it, I guess, your job easier. And
well, it's just narrative all the time. I mean, you've got to have that story, that narrative around it.
Yeah.
Sending out a results statement. Yeah. Won't work.
Not going to get you far.
Yeah.
And Kirsty, do you know which segments are most widely viewed?
No, not so much, just because it's based every hour on our viewing figures. So if they rise that hour, it could be because of, you know, what was in the, bearing in mind that Sky News is a 24-hour breaking news channel. So it kind of varies. But in terms of our viewership, we always get many emails actually from Africa. We have a huge following there on African business stories. So every time an African pitch comes to me or an African business, I'm always really keen to take those. In terms of other sorts of stories that gain a lot of interest for us, the more sort of consumer side to business stories, just because you've got, you know, fashion is always a really good one, and one that we don't hear enough from the fashion industry. I know that Boohoo, Misguided, Primark, I will bid for those every time there are results, and they're not very willing to come to us and speak to us, which is a shame. And I think also when you kind of went back to the sort of points on what not to do when it's bad publicity, especially over the last year, Sky News have really heard a little sit down, the business show talking about that. So for us, that would be great to do. Yeah, and it's really tricky because, as I say, the hour is an hour, and it's not kind of reported in segments, but yeah, there are sort of main things as examples.
Cool, thanks for sharing. So my last question, I think we kind of talked about it already, so I won't ask unless there's a burning desire to tell us what's your pet peeve when it comes to PR people reaching out. We kind of talked about what not to do, but is there like anything that like really gets your goat?
Yeah, I can go first.
Yes,
constantly having I have one PR company who will call me constantly, and it goes past the line of letting you know, like, we'll be in contact, but you know, we'll send multiple emails every day on what guests they have lined up that week, and we'll somehow got hold of my private phone, and we'll call that as well at like 8 o'clock, asking if the guest will be on the next day after, saying we're not interested. So that's not great. And also, yeah, it's just not cool. And I had another who added me on Facebook and asked if their guest was going to be appearing on Friday on the Monday. And obviously, because Ian King Live is a 5-day-a-week show with 10 guests every day, we kind of again work in the after a program we focus on the next day, after a program we focus on the next day. It's very hard unless it's company results, in which case we are bidding for, you know, a few weeks in advance to worry about, you know, a guest that's pitching something about climate on Friday for us. That's very much low down the pecking order in terms of priorities for the program.
Yeah, I guess boundaries, right? Being persistent is okay, but there's a line that we should not be crossing. And yeah, personal telephone numbers, probably best not to, unless you already have a relationship with that person and they've given it to you directly. Thanks for that. Carly, Neil, anything that gets your goat?
I'll go. Badly written press releases. And again, it's one of those really basic things, but you know, keep it short and sweet, 2 pages maximum. The editor can reach out if they want more information. Always include a quote, always include links to a high-res image, preferably landscape and portrait if you've got one, because good pictures of mining can be really hard to come by. And if you've got a good picture, it can really bump you up the homepage or the newsletter. You know, always include the date. You'd be amazed how often that's missed off of press releases. Social media handles for the company and contact details for the sort of the comms or PR person. And the other one that I thought was lack of communication. So if you get a pitch, say for an op-ed or input for a technical feature accepted, and say you're going to run over the deadline that you've agreed, just reach out, even if it's 1 or 2 lines on an email, let the editor know, because it's really tricky if you're not being kept in the loop, particularly if you've got, you know, 5, 6, 7 companies contributing to something. Don't let the deadline pass, basically, to wait and be chased. Be professional, manage their expectations, and they're more likely to work with you again if you do.
Great. Neil, anything to add?
Just one thing. I mean, I appreciate it's quite nerve-wracking if you're at a PR company, you've got to phone up me or another journalist sort of thing and try and pitch the story. But I'm continually amazed sometimes when people do it, they haven't really done their homework about what it is they're trying to tell me. I had a couple of examples last week of people phoning up and say, do you want to talk to X because this deal is about to be voted on? And I was like, well, why would I want to do that? Can you kind of explain a bit more about why this vote matters and why it's interesting and what's happening with it? And perhaps who the big shareholders are, et cetera, et cetera. None of those things were covered. And it just struck me as a bit sort of lazy. And someone was just been ordered to make 10 calls to 10 journalists and do it. I find that quite annoying.
Yeah, it's important to respect your time. I mean, yeah, we can see that newspapers are quite thin on the ground. There's not that many people, so your day is quite full. And so if we're going to get you on the line, we have to do our homework, respect your time, and make sure that what we're pitching to you is relevant. We shouldn't be pitching you, boohoo to Neil, because that's not your thing. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're done our questions. We have a few questions from the audience. The first one's for Carly. It's about, so some publications will, the editors or the journalists will give you the article that they've written for final sign off. And this person is happy when they do that, but sometimes they don't. And the final version is just not up to snuff. And maybe possibly with erroneous information. So the person's asking, like, what should we do in these situations? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I mean, personally, if I'm interviewing someone, either for a standalone interview or a technical feature, I would always send a draft before publishing it. I think that's just a courteous thing to do. I guess the worry is that the comments you make might be taken out of context. So I would always, when discussing involvement, specify that you would like to see a draft beforehand. If that's not going to be possible, I would say insist that you send answers to their questions via email. So then you can double and triple check everything that you're sending them is watertight. and can't be taken out of context, doesn't have any technical errors in it beforehand. So you've done as much as you can on that side. If they persist in publishing things that are not correct, then I probably wouldn't work with them.
Thanks for that. So the next question comes from Simone, and it sounds like she would like to become an influencer in the mining space. And she's asking, perhaps this is for Neil or for Carly, not so much for Kirsty, like how to approach media companies so she can, to secure opportunities. I guess that's writing her own op-eds or perhaps doing segments. Do you have any suggestions for that, Carly?
I would say, I mean, it very much depends on your background and your experience, first of all, but you need some kind of touch points to go to those companies with. So you need to make sure that your social media channels are up to scratch. Things like LinkedIn and Twitter, definitely for the mining space. Perhaps Instagram, that one's coming up as well. Make sure you're putting time and effort into those channels so that people can see, you know, what you're about, what kind of areas you're interested in, what you're covering. Perhaps if you've got a website that people can visit so they can get more information about you, they've got some way to contact you, they can get hold of your CV. You could add a blog in on there. Blogs obviously take quite a lot of time and you need to keep up with them, be very consistent there. But again, it can be a great way if you're really into writing to showcase the areas that you're interested in and to showcase your writing, your personality. So I think those would be the main points I would put across.
Yeah, I guess, you know, instead of depending on other people's platform, is create your own platform. We're seeing that with Instagram, the content economy or the ownership economy, people creating their own Substack or their own blog post, a blog or Instagram where they start getting the followers, and then people like maybe Carly or Neil will come to them looking for input or insight. Cool. So the last question, and I can really identify with this frustration, Joe. So noted, Kirsty, we should not be invading your privacy or your personal space. But now that people are working from home, how working from home, and perhaps they live, I don't know, far away. How do you engage with them? How do you build that relationship if you can't just say, let's meet in the city for a coffee? Did anyone?
So I'm back in the office most days in the city, so I'm around and I quite like it actually, but kind of bearing in mind that I came into the business sort of news sector in the pandemic. So for me, it's been good to reach out and speak to PR companies and speak to people who've got in touch, go for a coffee, and actually you realize what they are representing and what clients they're working with. And I found that really helpful, especially when I've been packaging, which is doing the sort of report for 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock news, in knowing who you can reach out to. So my side, just drop me a line if I'm in town. I will always rather meet in person, because as Neil says, it's better to put a face to a name and know who's emailing you or texting you or calling you over a sort of cold call. So yeah, for me, I live in London, so I'm always around, and yeah, when I can make it work, I'm keen to.
Neil, Carly, anything to add?
Well, I mean, I live outside London, but we're coming into the office where we've been ordered in 3 days a week now, so you should always be able to find me in the office or around conferences or sort of around London, sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So that should be possible now, thankfully. These restrictions have eased. So
you can have people knocking at your door now.
No, that's fine. I mean, like, we had a couple of companies come in yesterday at the office, so that's good. It's nice to see people traveling around again, and good to meet coming from South America or wherever it might be.
Cool. Well, Carly, anything to add?
No, I was just going to say likewise. I mean, I'm self-employed. I work from home permanently, so always happy to come and meet people for a coffee.
Cool. Okay, well, that's it for our questions. We've got 10 minutes to spare, but I'm sure Neil, Kirsty, and Carly have a lot of work to do because it's a big day today. So I think we'll just wrap it up there, Iman.
Thank you, Ariadna, and thank you, Buchanan, and again, thank you to all our speakers for joining us this afternoon. I know it was a challenging day, or is a challenging day, so we appreciate that you have joined us. If this is your first time joining one of our events, Women in Mining UK is a volunteer-run non-profit organisation which promotes the employment, retention and progress of women in the mining industry. Everyone is welcome to become a member of WIM UK, regardless of gender or where you are located in the world. Go to our website to join. Membership is free. And it's almost that time. On Tuesday, 8th of March, nominations open for the 2022 WIM 100. In 2020, we received a record 626 nominations from 60 countries around the world. And the 100 featured were selected due to their inspiring contribution towards a stronger, safer, and more sustainable mining industry. To learn more about the WIM 100, please do go to our website. One more plug. If you are a Women in Mining UK member, please take our membership survey. It will take about 5 minutes of your time, and the purpose of this survey is to understand more about who our members are, your views on WIM UK, and how we can improve your experience. All the details are in the chat. The survey closes on Tuesday, 1st of March. And to complete the survey, please do go to our website. And our next WIM UK online event will be on the 24th of March at 4 p.m. GMT on mining careers for the green economy, employment opportunities for the road to net zero. Hot topic currently as we are in the race for the critical minerals. Please do look out for all event and registration details on our website and in our newsletter. So that's a wrap. Thank you again for joining us and have a lovely rest of your day.